hi out there of YouTube viewers, or in this case listeners. I'm not feeling very pretty tonight, so I'm just going to do this as a audio recording. And, you know, due to the subject matter anyway, I'll let you look at some pretty pictures instead of my bizarre looking face. What I'm going to talk about today in my thoughts and musings is a topic that was put forth on the Warhammer YouTubers on the Google Plus community, put forth by Vince Venturella, as he does every Friday. And the subject of this week's discussion is soft scores in tournaments. Now I'm going to take this angle again as a tournament organizer, and I want to talk to you about how soft scores play a part in there. I guess predominantly, let's view this from a couple of different angles. Let's view it from the angle of why we have the soft scores in the first place, what purpose they serve, how we go about gauging them and scoring them, and then ultimately how much of a tournament scoring percentage, I guess, should those attribute to when we're talking about the best overall Warhammer player. Okay, so let's maybe lay the precursor down here and say that my full belief is that a Warhammer event and a Warhammer participant at an event has to exhibit a combination of three different aspects. The first and foremost that we're going to talk about very little today is their strategic element. Okay, so this would be reflected in their game scores, wins, losses, by how much, etc. That'll all bank into there. But when we talk about soft scores, we have the two other key components, and that is the hobby and their community involvement. Now, the hobby involvement is where we talk about the painting, converting, any artistic expression that they put into their army and their display and presentation of it. And then when I talk about community, that is how much of a personality comes forth out of them when they're playing games. And this is generally lumped into the more common goal of a sportsmanship score. Okay. Now, why do we have these things? Well, I mean, first of all, at a tournament, we have a game that is a competition, and we have winners and losers for each game. Okay, so that's where the strategic element comes in. And so we're going to award points for that, and that's invariably, in most cases, the most heavily weighted of the scores that then eventually go towards that overall score. The hobby side of it, or maybe before I move over to that, to carry on with the gameplay thing, why we do this is because it's a competition and it's the most easily measurable thing when we're talking about victory points claimed and battle points scored. That's the most easy thing to measure, and is the thing that you're spending on that particular day most of your time at. It's the gameplay that's coming to the forward there. That's the thing that's being focused on and the light is shined on the most, is the gameplay and the activity going back and forth on the tables. Now, when we talk about the hobby aspect, well, admittedly, this is all related to the work that you do outside of the tournament. So you show up on that day with your gloriously displayed army on its display tray, perhaps, and you've got some scenic aspects to that as well. You might have labeled your units and named your characters and unfurled your banners, etc., etc. And we measure this. Why? In a tournament? Well, because it's 80% of what you do in Warhammer. 80% of the time that you spend Warhammering in general is painting your models, assembling, cleaning them up, putting your hours of love into it. That's where that all comes in. So further on to that, I like to think that really needs to be rewarded. The effort made by the painters and the hobbyists has always got to be a part of the tournament measure, because it is so much weight of time that's put into this thing that we love as Warhammer. Let's think about, of course, why we go to events in the first place. I'm going to back up into the player aspect here just for a moment, but also bear in mind this part of the desire of the tournament organizer as well, to some aspects, and that is that they want to have an exhibition of Warhammer. And when I say an exhibition of Warhammer, I mean not just a bunch of gray armies being pushed across the battlefield, of overturned cups and stacked up books that you pretend are hills and woods, right? It's a miniature game, and the reason why we do miniature games is for the visual draw of it all. So when you, as a player, go to an event, I think it should be expected that you're going to have a visual fiesta there as well. It's not just about the grind of the competition that you're looking forward to. There's got to be at least some part of you, no matter how much you might dislike painting of your own, you like seeing painted toy soldiers. Love it. You have to love it. It's such an allure. It's always an attraction, and it always should be an attraction. Because otherwise, as I said, we'll be playing with upturned cups. Maybe we'll just be playing with, like cardboard chits on the table and nothing else more than that. So equally, as a tournament organizer, we want to be known as an operation that is going to give you that, right? Just as much as the players should expect to see that, we want to offer that. We want to be known for an event where people bring their showy stuff, bring the things that are going to be attractive to view and to be proud of, to show off. So I think I want to just slide aside here and say for a second, in my local area, I guess from what I'm understanding about other areas of the world where they have Warhammer tournaments and etc., we are very blessed in that it's an absolute standard that you don't come to a tournament with an unpainted figure. Not an unpainted army, an unpainted figure. It's assumed and understood that you have a painted army. So that is the lowest common denominator, is that you at least have done some work onto it and you've painted it. So let's bear that in mind. So the purpose why we do this, and to wrap that up in a quick thought, is from a tournament organizer and from a player perspective. When you go to a group gathering of a bunch of Warhammer players, then you should be expecting to see an exhibition of the hobby. Okay? Very simple. Now, for sportsmanship, why do we include that? Why is that important in the Warhammer community? And it's a unique thing, admittedly, in sporting competition, in other game competition. I know that in Vince's video, he tends to draw parallels to the Magic the Gathering business and other things like that. Video gaming would be another one where there's just no semblance of sportsmanship. It doesn't matter in that. There's no measure, there's no reward. You can be as much of a douche as you want to, as long as you're within the bounds of their rules and regulations. You go right ahead. But again, as a tournament organizer, part of why we're hosting these events is because we want to build community. We want to bring people together who are in, again, admittedly, a smaller niche hobby, so that they have people that they can connect with, that they can share thoughts with, that they have a common ground that they can discuss. We want to put these guys in a situation where they can go away from a tournament weekend with hopefully a couple of more new gaming buddies, if not friends. Okay? So therefore, the emphasis on sportsmanship is that you present yourself in an open way so that that can potentially bloom, without getting all touchy-feely here. I'm not expecting love-ins or anything like that, but I do want it to be understood at an event that I host that they are respectful to the game, that they are respectful to the opponents that they're fighting across from, and that they represent themselves in a positive light, so that those relationships can seed and grow, so that there can be some kind of community future and community growth of more guys getting to know each other, which means for you as a player, if I'm again looking at the player perspective, I want to have more guys to play against. I want to have more variety of armies that I can face, except for the same 3 armies that my buddies have. And that in turn perpetuates the hobby. Okay? That's why sportsmanship is so important. That's why we're going to keep it in there. So now let's talk about how we score these things, how we judge them in a way, and both of those can be synonymous. So let's do the sportsmanship one first, and then we're going to talk a little bit deeper about painting afterwards. Now, admittedly, sportsmanship is a bit of an odd one, because quite often it gets tied in with what was the game result experience, how badly did I get smashed, and that kind of taints it a little bit. So we've tried a different number of ways in my tournament years, which has been, you know, a few dozen tournament events that I've run. You can do a sort of a behavioral scale, like say a scoring of 1 to 5, where 1 you're an idiot and I never want to see you anywhere near my Warhammer models again, versus 5 where, you know, I wish we could just go home and play Warhammer into the night, every night, forever. Now, two things happen here. The guys that are just generally good guys themselves are automatically going to mark a guy with the top mark. And therefore, if we have everybody throughout giving out the top mark, then it really doesn't make any differentiation. And it takes maybe about 10% of the people out of the running at that top echelon level, because somebody might have been rubbed a little bit the wrong way and give them a 4 or a 3 instead of a 5. But it's very, very rare that it actually gets marked truthfully, with 3 being the mean and 4 and 5 being exceptional one way and 1 and 2 being exceptional the other way. In any case, the trouble is it doesn't differentiate a whole great deal in the end result of a tournament scoring. I guess the other part of the downside of that, and the challenge that we have as tournament organizers, is when guys want to zero bomb them. Like if I get swept from the field by turn 3 and I feel a little bit butthurt about what my opponent did, that taints my score. My feelings about that, whether or not the guy was fully within the rules, fully gentlemanly, you know, offered me a handshake and a drink somewhere in between, that only makes up the ground so much from the fact that I just got worked, you know, and I got all my stuff pushed in and all my toys were off the table early. Unfortunately, that taints a sportsmanship score. And when you have a greater scale, like say a 1 to 5, or even at times that we've done a 1 to 10 scale even in a particular game, the result of the game taints the sportsmanship score, unfortunately. So there's some things that we've tried to do to alleviate that, and that is simply that we have put in a pass or a fail score to sportsmanship, simply meaning that game went okay, or it went great. Everybody got along. We didn't hate each other. Nobody threw dice at the other guy's glasses, and we managed to complete the game in a respectful, congenial way. Okay, so that's a pass. And then the only other option in that system is a fail. And a fail is, well, the guy was argumentative about rules he didn't know. He was very pouty when things went wrong. He rubbed it in my face when things went wrong for me. And it generally was an uncomfortable situation. I couldn't hold a good conversation with this guy, and things like that. That might be a fail. Okay? And the way that we handle that at my events is that if you mark a guy as a fail, then we should expect a little bit of explanation. You don't have to explain it to have a confrontation with that particular individual right then and there at the table. But if you've at least had an attempt to have a conversation with him, come and tell the tournament judges. And we will either, depending on the severity of it, talk to that guy so that he can straighten it out for the future. Because again, we're concerned about building community. Now again, in that scenario, when you have a pass and fail, again, it's going to be super rare that all but 1 or 2 guys get fail scores. So again, you have no differentiation at the top end. But what it does do, in any case, regardless of whether you're getting any differentiation in sportsmanship scores, if there is a score associated with it, people, guys are going to want those points. So they're going to do what they can to behave in at least an average, if not better than average fashion, to help preserve those scores. They don't want to lose those scores, right? So that's key. So then, let's go on and talk about painting for a bit. Now, painting admittedly is the harder thing to manage when you're doing a tournament event. Comparatively to the other two, we just talked about sportsmanship, but to talk about the battle scores, I mean, that's just a simple math formula. Guy kills X number of guys compared to the other return. Either you award points for a win or a loss. However you want to do it, that's a predetermined formula, so that's easy. What painting is all about, though, is it's subjective. And there's really only one way that you can make it not subjective, and I want to talk about this for one a second, and that is that you can create an available checklist of things to look for in an army. And this is something that the players can even mark themselves. In fact, I have not done it in this fashion, but I have been to events where a checklist of what your paint score is going to be is provided to you before the event. So you can go look through and you can see, well, you get a check for painting at least 3 colors. You get a check for doing your bases. You get a check for doing freehand, for doing conversions, for blending, for highlighting, for shading, etc., etc. So you might have like 20 different aspects of hobby that are related to that, and you effectively know what's going to be your paint score before you go in that day. And you can also, in a way, prepare for what is going to be measured as a paint score for that day. Okay, so that's one way to handle things. The other way, and this is the more subjective way, is when you have a panel of judges that are going over and looking at your armies. Now, the way that this comes out is that you can use the same sort of checklist basis to get your judges at least on the same level as far as what you're looking for and what things should be considered when you're looking at an army overall as far as the best painted. But even still, when those scores come in, then you kind of have a little bit of a bell curve associated with it in the way that it all comes out at the end. You can really only have one best army, right? And the number of competitors that are in the running for that is going to be very small, hopefully, because as you go through the field, no matter what your painting level and skill and expertise in your meta and at that event is, you're going to have a tight group of average. Okay, now that average may be low or it may be high depending upon the grouping that you have, but there is going to be an average, and then there's going to be ones that trail away and don't quite keep up, and there's going to be ones that are exceptional that go beyond the average. Okay, so either way, that is in a way still very subjective, because ultimately it's up to the judges to come to a consensus about which of those ones on display are the best. Now, the challenges that we have with that, aside from the checklist one that I mentioned, if you're doing a judged sort of a scenario, then the challenges that you have with that is if your judges, and I like to do a panel of 3 for the most part, if your judges all have a different idea of what's good, right? Like one judge might write really bright, flashy colors and bold stuff that draws him in from 4 or 5 feet away. Whereas another fella might look very closely and look to see, and he's digging for brush strokes. He's looking for minute flaws, and he's looking to see soft blending and technique mastery at the close level that wouldn't attract an eye from 4 or 5 feet away. And if those guys can't come together on a consensus, then you might have a bit of a skew as to which army is the best. And in a way, that's not so much of a challenge, because in some other ways that can be a real boon and a benefit, because it kind of lends to the idea that sometimes it is up to the eye of the beholder to decide on which is the best out there, right? And in some aspects of judging, you can't be swayed by the super exciting centerpiece model and just judge your painted army based on that, when a guy has done nothing but paint to good quality the front row of his spearman regiment, and the back 5 rows are just base coated without even any kind of highlight on them, right? So that can obviously sway some things as well, and be a bit of a challenge in the subjective side of things. It's up to the TO to make sure that his judges are competent and that they are considering the whole piece of work and are doing their best not to be swayed by the one thing. And if you do that, then I think you do the judging justice and you give the appropriate paint score to the places that they deserve. One other way that it can be judged as well, and I've tried this out on a few occasions, is just simply by peer votes. Right? So you have the whole sample group of every participant in your event, and what you simply do is at some point you might again have one or two paint judges that go around and they'll nominate part of the field to be judged upon, and they'll pull those ones aside at a certain time during your tournament day and set them up so that each and every participant in the event will go around and they'll vote for the one that they think is the best. You simply tally up those votes and that's your best painted. Okay, so you can give an award for that. But the tricky thing there is that how does that translate to tournament points if you're going to turn it into a best overall thing? Okay. Now before we come and talk about the best overall thing, which is we're going to wrap it up, the one last thing I want to talk about with painting, because it's been brought up on several occasions, and Vince himself brought it up in his own discussion about soft scores, is, well, what do you do about guys that show up with an army that they bought, or an army that they paid somebody else to paint for them, or an army that they've borrowed from somebody else? Well, I would simply say that those armies don't compete. And before that, you think, oh Jesus, well that's terribly harsh. Well, if we're going to award points for playing a game and beating somebody and scoring those winning points, if I get somebody else to play that game for me, do I deserve those points? If I show up and I have a sidekick who does all the communicating for me in an event, I mean, aside from situations where you might be deaf and sign language and you need an interpreter, like don't get me wrong, I'm not insensitive to those situations, but think of the ridiculousness of the situation where I'm a perfectly functioning human being like I am right now, and I have, you know, some fantastic actor come and stand in for me and do all the talking, and he woos you and charms you and gets you all excited and makes you feel great. Do I deserve those points for sportsmanship? I don't think so. So therefore, do I deserve all the points for the hobby effort that I have not put in? I don't think so. So how does that fit into a best overall then in that situation? Well, I'll tell you. Maybe I'll break it down this way. In a lot of the events that I do and that I attend to, we have 4 awards that are offered. So one for each of those pillars of the hobby, right? So we have a best sportsmanship, we have a best painted, and we have a best general. So it lends to each of those things that we have talked about earlier that are the 3 pillars of our community. So we have community, we have strategy, and we have hobby itself, right? Now all those things together, they come into the best overall. Okay, so if you have played your games and you have fought well and you have scored points on the field, well then you have your points that you go to that go towards your generalship, and they go towards your overall. We have the points that you have accrued due to sportsmanship, okay, being a nice guy and representing yourself well. But maybe you don't have points now because you didn't bother to participate in the hobby part of it before the event, right? You bought it. So now you don't have any points going towards that to the overall. So clearly, you're there probably because you're aiming for the generalship anyway. You're there for gameplay over hobby because you haven't spent all that time in the hobby. Or maybe you're there to enjoy the atmosphere and really drink it in and connect with the community. Okay, so you're going to be a guy that can still aim for the sportsmanship award. Now, it might be very rare that you can win the best overall without having any painting points. It's possible, but not very likely. So let's just say that if you don't paint your army, I guess you're eliminating 2 out of those 4 awards from your contention. Very likely. Okay? But hopefully you still, as a player, have, knowing that coming in, you're still there for 2/3 of it, in a way, 2/3 of the hobby aspect. You're there for the gameplay. You're there for the community. And if you feel that that's rewarding enough for you, then great. It may be that you'll never named as the best overall, but you could certainly go away and challenge for the best general and the best sportsmanship. Those can be yours. Now, to come back on that thought again, that the best overall might be out of your reach, well, it might not be. It depends on how the tournament organizer themselves want to weight that. It seems the norm, just to come back and wrap it all up, that just about every event will have a measure of all of those 3 pillars of Warhammer. And within those 3 pillars, it's really up to the tournament organizer for them on their own to decide how much they want to give weight to one of those 3 aspects. For instance, something that's very, very common is that you weight 50% of your overall scoring towards the gameplay and the strategy. And then you might do 25% for each of hobby painting and community sportsmanship. Okay. Others that I've been to are 60-20-20. Others I've been to are 33% each, so they treat them exactly equally. Okay. So in one of those scenarios where maybe painting is only worth 10%, maybe you find an event like that and it's 70% or 75% just about gameplay, well, then maybe it doesn't matter that you painted your army and you get out there and do it. But ultimately, I think when I'm wrapping this whole thought up, I am adamant that each of those 3 pillars need to be represented. And as a tournament organizer, I think it's wonderful that there is variety and that every tournament organizer is going to cast an extra weight towards one of those over the other. And as a player, expect to get each of those 3 pillars represented at an event that you go to. Expect to see nice painted armies, expect to have competition, and expect to get yourself immersed in the community. If you do all that, it's all positive. But if any one of these 3 goes away, then I think that you lose something of it, and that is why I'm all in favor of soft scores in the end. So there's my thoughts. There's my answer to the topic of the week of soft scores, why we have them, what we do with them, and why they're important. So let's get your thoughts as well, because again, this is on my experience over the years and my own meta community. So if you want to share your thoughts, please do. Until then, adios.